Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Lackawanna Past Times. I'm Sarah Puccini, the Assistant Director of the Lackawanna Historical Society. Our presenter today is Julie Manwarren. Julie grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and has always loved history and research. When she isn't building someone's family trees or researching historic people, places, and things, she enjoys spending time with her husband, Phil, and 2 kids in South Abington Township. Julie enjoys working for the community news group of the Scranton Times and as a journalist for the Abington Suburban until it closed in 2020. She currently works as a freelance writer and is a historical researcher, blogger, and author. Her research on a collection of old glass negatives from the Finger Lakes, New York region led her to write a book, Floyd Ingram Springwater, A Finger Lakes Hamlet. It was published in 2021 by Arcadia Publishing. She has researched and written about old homes, historic businesses and organizations, one-room schoolhouses, historic events, old roads, and family histories in our area. In 2019, Julie, along with members of the Lackawanna Historical Society, gathered to focus their research and efforts on preserving the history of Clarks Summit, South Abington Township, and the surrounding area known as the Abingtons. This led Julie to research the history of the Lackawanna Trail that she will speak on today. So Julie, I'll turn the program over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be with you. I love the Lackawanna County Historical Society and everything that they do. And I'm excited to bring to you what I've learned about the history of the Lackawanna Trail. So let's get started. We're about to go 100 years back in time. It was 1922. The most popular car model was the Ford Model T. Ford actually offered 7 variations on the Model T in 1922. And besides the runabout and truck, there was also a coupe and 4-door. A basic Model T back in 1922 sold for only $319, a far cry from today's prices. 100 years ago, Warren Harding was president, and in Pennsylvania, 2 women were voted into Congress for the first time. William Sproul was governor of Pennsylvania, and in the office of the Scranton Board of Trade, the forerunner to the Scranton Chamber of Commerce, members met to plan an event that had been years in the making, the opening of the Lackawanna Trail Highway from Clarks Summit to Binghamton, New York. This highway would be built on the railroad bed of the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad. So long before the interstate system and highways were numbered nationally, a man named J.W. Browning came up with the idea for a highway built over an abandoned roadbed. He called the Board of Trade and presented the idea. The Lackawanna Board of Trade believed that a paved road north of Clarks Summit, which already had a paved road from Scranton, would boost trade and enrich our area. They set their sights on the abandoned Lackawanna Railroad bed that was approximately 35 miles long. The stone ballasted roadbed that the Lackawanna Railroad Company abandoned once it built the Nicholson Cutoff was built well with beautifully engineered mile-long tunnel. It was stone ballasted and drained, and it had an easy grade and level stretches that made it perfect for a paved highway. Prominent Scranton businessmen, C.S. Woolworth, George German, Thomas E. Jones, and others, along with the Scranton Board of Trade, came up with a plan. It was presented to the president of the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad, and the plan was that the State Highway Department would take over the railway bed and build the road, and that was authorized under the Act of 1917. Everyone was on board, and the Scranton Auto Club, which is now AAA, I didn't know that until I researched this, but the Scranton Auto Club was deeply interested in seeing the highway become a reality. The advantages were unlimited to Scranton and the surrounding communities and would make it possible for farmers to easily transport produce and make Scranton a natural stopping point for tourists. The road that was already paved that stretched from Scranton into Clarks Summit is called, what we call anyway, the Notch. And this is between Bell and West Mountains. In 1918, when talks began for the trail, the hardest part was already done. It was done by these early settlers of the Abingtons. Coming through the Notch over Leggett's Mountain before railroads were put in was no small feat. So when they came through the Notch originally, the early settlers of the Abingtons, they came over what was called Leggett's Mountain. And this is before any modern roads were put in. So it was no small feat. Hollister's history of the Lackawanna Valley describes the journey through the Notch. In 1791, encroachments were made on a warrior's path through the Notch for a passage of a wagon when the mountain road elapsed again into forest. One of those early settlers was Ephraim Leach. His testimony of the perilous journey through the Notch was also documented in Hollister's history. And this is how it reads. The utter solitude of Leggett's Gap, interrupted only by the screech of the panther or the cry of the wolf as they sprang along its sides with prodigious leaps, made even a trip to the mill perilous in the cold season of the year. Many a time, said Leach, have I passed through the Notch with my little grist on my shoulder, holding in my hand a large club, which I kept swinging fiercely to keep away the wolves from growling at me. And to my faithful club, often bitten and broken when I reached home, have I apparently been indebted my life. So it was not a hard, it was very perilous for them walking. And this was a Native American path through our region. But as land was cleared for farms for the Addingtons, the narrow passage was open to accommodate a railroad. And the first railroad was chartered in 1832 and finally opened in June of 1851. And that connected Scranton to Great Bend in Susquehanna with a distance of about 48 miles. On September 24th, 1851, the county published news on a proposed road in the Republican Farmer and Democratic Journal. And it said the engineers in the employ of the Leggett's Gap Railroad are exploring a route for connecting a road from Scranton to this place. The ground for the construction of the road to the point proposed is undoubtedly highly favorable, but it's beyond that point that difficulties really begin. The elevation to be overcome beyond Scranton is very great. We hope the improvement will go on as it can do no hurt and may, if properly located, do much good. Little did they know how much good that would do. This small section of road would be vital and set the stage for what would later become Route 11 or the Lackawanna Trail. Leggett's Gap Road, as it was then called, wound its way through the Notch and was a toll road that was owned by the railroad later on. Then it was sold to the Pennsylvania Highway Department in 1916. Still called the Notch over 200 years later, what was once a footpath taken by early settlers so long ago has become a major thoroughfare for our community. So a better road meant better access that could benefit farmers. But the first step of the plan was to continue this road from Clarks Summit onward to communities like Nicholson and later New Milford. The distance was about 35 miles when it was originally planned, but they still had much to do, a lot of red tape to get through, and funding to be approved. With public support behind them, they also showed that the present road stretching north from Scranton had a poor foundation. Oh, there's the Notch. I forgot to do that. That's the Notch today. You can see what these roads look like in these pictures. At the time, road building cost to the state was said to have averaged around $25,000 per mile. But it was estimated by engineers that using the present Lackawanna roadbed, it could be resurfaced at only $3,000 to $4,000 a mile, a bargain. There would be additional costs to replace bridges, of course, but with the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad offering 33 miles of the roadbed for a nominal sum, believed to be only $1, for all intents and purposes, it made it a gift to the state of Pennsylvania. A board of the Lackawanna Trail Association was formed to push the project forward. You can see here, I believe this right here would be part of Clarks Summit through Factoryville. And this is further looking back from Nicholson back on the valley. Over 300 businessmen and leaders from Scranton and surrounding communities attended a dinner meeting at the Casey Hotel in November of 1917 to talk about plans for the new highway. Colonel Watrous, E.L. Merriman, Commissioners O'Neill and Farr, D.L. Morgan, and presidents of the Wilkes-Barre Auto Club, Binghamton Auto Club, and Scranton Auto Club were all in attendance. They received approval from the state and governor's offices in 1918. The Scranton Board of Trade Journal read, "The conference was held in the governor's office at the Capitol in Harrisburg, and at its conclusion, the governor of Pennsylvania said, 'We are committed to the Lackawanna Trail. We need it. We want it as badly as you want us to take it over. It is necessary and will be of tremendous value to the people.'" The governor asked the Trail Association to start at once at securing releases from property owners along the part of the proposed highway route. The benefits to all meant that they found little to no opposition. And as you can see here, this is an old map of the DL&W Railroad. And those towns between Scranton and Binghamton would all be affected, and it would benefit everyone in its path. Dennis Martin has done a lot of research on this. He's a volunteer at the Historical Society. He wrote a publication on the history and building of the Lackawanna Trail. And in it, he writes, "We assume that the national crisis that was mentioned was World War I. While the 1918 influenza was occurring, there was also a war going on. But the journal doesn't mention it. The right-of-way releases and the focus on the road became very important. And it was received very positively." J.W. Browning was one of the men who first came up with the idea for the Lackawanna Trail. He worked on getting releases of property rights and securing the right-of-way. He was a landowner along the trail and donated a section of his own land for this road in 1917. There was a lot of red tape to get through, but everyone worked together to make this road happen. An association was formed, money was raised, and the rail bed was surveyed. Very few opposed the project, with initial plans to build the road at least to New Milford. D.L. Morgan in 1919 was president of the Motor Club of Lackawanna County. Morgan was also serving as president of the Lackawanna Trail Association, and with others presented a plan to improve the roads beyond New Milford. They came up with a plan to extend it all the way from Scranton to Binghamton, New York. The Scranton Board of Trade Journal was highly influential in its publicity of this new road. They tried all angles to ensure the public's opinion in their favor. This report ran in April of 1919. Northeastern Pennsylvania does not yet realize the value of good roads and the uses to which the motor truck could be put. Last March, the Post Office Department made an experiment. At 6 o'clock one morning, they loaded a truck in Lancaster, Pennsylvania with 18,000 eggs in crates and 1,000 day-old chicks and started off for New York City, 180 miles distant. At the same time, they sent to the same consignee the same kind of shipment by train. The truck arrived in New York 12 hours after leaving Lancaster. And on arriving, the consignee's door, 9 eggs were broken and 4 of the chicks had died. The train shipment was 4 days arriving at Jersey City, and another day was lost, advising the consignee, who had sent his own truck to Jersey City, to get the shipment. And on arrival, over half the chicks were dead and 1,000 of the eggs were broken. Their point: better roads meant faster, safer transportation of goods. They asked in that journal in 1919, "Are we, the people of Lackawanna County and the city of Scranton, willing to stand for this condition by allowing our road conditions to remain as they are?" The answer was a resounding no. D.R. Reese, president of the Lackawanna Motor Club and Scranton Boosters, helped to make sure the Lackawanna Trail Plan was not stopped or delayed. With the full support of William Truesdale, president of the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad, and the governor of the state of Pennsylvania, the plan moved forward and work began in February 1919. In October of that year, the first mile of concrete was poured, and all the men who believed in the Lackawanna Trail and helped to bring it to fruition were present and helped pour that. And this is a picture, sorry about the blurry page, but this is a picture of them pouring the very first mile of concrete. In October of that year, concrete was poured, but it was said, marking the accomplishment of one of the greatest projects ever fought by Scranton men, the first concrete on the Lackawanna Trail that is to become one of the country's finest highways has been laid this afternoon at Glenburn. Work is now being rushed on many miles of the trail, and before cold weather sets in, much of the road will be finished. D.R. Reese, president of the Motor Club of Lackawanna County, and D.L. Morgan, former president, wheeled the first barrows of sand and gravel to the mixer. And Mr. Reese, A.J. Casey, and Mr. Morgan dumped the first, second, and third buckets of concrete onto the graded road. More than 150 prominent Scranton men were at the ceremonies that marked the laying of that first stretch of road. The state contract to lay this section was held by Ruth Venn, Reese, and O'Brien. The Gaylord Engineering and Construction Company had a contract for another big section, and they began instantly laying their layers of concrete. Meanwhile, in Scranton, Charles H. Miles was rebuilding the Lyceum Theater. Large limestone pillars were donated to the city for public use and placed in the possession of the Scranton Times. They planned to place them at the entrance of Naog Park in Scranton for a new arch there. However, that plan was delayed, and the pillars, valued at $9,000, seemed destined for a dire fate. The Lackawanna Motor Club hurriedly got a plan together and requested the columns for the new highway. It was received, and the columns were secured by the Lackawanna Motor Club of Scranton in 1921 and placed at the opening of the new portion of the Lackawanna Trail in Clarks Summit in June of 1922. The columns were described as beautiful pieces of fluted stone with handsome caps and bases. Each was carved from a single stone and weighed in the neighborhood of 10 tons. The plan was for the columns to be the foundation of a magnificent arc that would mark the entrance of the Lackawanna Trail. The Lackawanna, the Sproul Company, which was owned by the Governor Sproul of Pennsylvania, was tasked with the construction of the new road. They broke a record for the speed in which they completed it, and it's too bad this construction company isn't in charge of our road repairs today. Mr. Reese, president of the Lackawanna Motor Club, said when the trail project was completed, our dreams are now realized, and plans were immediately underway for a huge celebration, which was called the biggest event of the year. 4,000 felt pennants were handed out with the words Lackawanna Trail on them. A dinner was held the night before at the Hotel Casey, and Scranton hotels were filled with guests, speeches were given, and newspapers covered the event throughout the region. A procession of automobiles from Scranton to Binghamton began at 9 a.m. on June 28, 1922, as thousands left Jefferson Avenue in Scranton and then drove through Scranton and up the Lackawanna Trail, which is now the Scranton-Carbondale Highway. They wound through the Notch in the Abingtons and then went north. Near Gravel Pond Road, they passed through the large pillars on either side and entered the new stretch of highway. They drove all the way to Binghamton. A squad of police officers accompanied the parade of cars and followed at the rear by service and emergency vehicles. Governors from 2 states were there in the processional, along with prominent politicians, businessmen, and women who also made the drive. 100 years later, members of the community and several car clubs covered about 5 miles of trail for a centennial cruise on the Lackawanna Trail just a few months ago. We did more than just go for a drive that day. We were part of celebrating history. Oh, this is a picture back from 1922 of the crowds in Scranton. "100 years ago, the Scranton Auto Club was a driving force behind the planning of the Lackawanna Trail. Scranton's Pharaoh's Car Club planned to help the centennial celebration that took place on July 9th. Clarks Summit University donated pillars, Weiss Market donated food for lunch, and commemorative plaques were distributed to those who participated. Oh, there it is. This is a picture of the celebration we had, and it was really nice. We were able to have cars come by and get their pictures taken between pillars that were donated. Years after its opening in 1922, the beginning of the Lackawanna Trail was moved. It was prone to accidents due to a sharp curve. And when the highway was widened to accommodate more lanes, the columns disappeared. I and others have done much research to discover what became of the grand columns that once marked the entrance to the trail, but we don't know what became of them. 100 years ago, they were placed near Gravel Pond Road, which is where Lackawanna Trail goes through now. Thousands of vehicles had passed through those pillars in July of 1922, but around that time, they disappeared. It's still a mystery what became of the columns that once marked the opening of the Lackawanna Trail, and if anyone has any ideas what might have happened to them, let us know. We've investigated it and can't find them. I just want to close today by thanking my friend Dennis Martin for his informative research and help. He's been a valuable volunteer at the Lackawanna County Historical Society. He has studied the Lackawanna Trail extensively, and he created a publication on the Lackawanna Trail that includes many articles published by the Scranton Board of Trade. You can request a copy from the Lackawanna County Historical Society, and they can send you a PDF via email, or you can see that publication at the Abington Community Library. The pictures viewed in this presentation are from the Lackawanna County Historical Society's collection, as well as the private postcard collection of Charlie Compass. And there's also clippings from Scranton newspapers that I accessed at newspapers.com. I'll end this afternoon by sharing what Dr. Rust said in 1922 when he spoke at the Rotary Club. This was just after the grand celebration and the parade had ended with the drive, which is along what is now Route 11 from Scranton all the way to Binghamton. This is what he said in that speech. The opening of the trail means a new day for northeastern Pennsylvania and for the southern tier of New York. Governor Sproul, with whom I rode on the trip, said that he never realized before that northeastern Pennsylvania possessed such scenery as was unfolded before his eyes well en route to Binghamton. After the great celebration, I could say last night, this is the end of a perfect day. The trail means a better Scranton, more industries and tourists, hotel accommodations enlarged. And when I started back home to Scranton from Indianapolis last week, I felt pride in returning to the region of such grand scenery, lakes and rivers, for other states have nothing to compare with it. The trail means a building of humanity, fellowship, and a better country. Woe to those passing over the trail who cannot respond to the thrill of scenic beauty all about them as they ride over it. And Dr. Rust's words from 1922 is a warning to us not to take it for granted. So you who might love to cruise in your car on a beautiful fall day and enjoy miles of open road, you who call Pennsylvania your home, do not take her for granted. Every bend in the road reveals new sights to behold, and beyond every hill are layers of endless mountains. And so 100 years later, we celebrate the Lackawanna Trail that gave us access to one of the best portions of our great state and all that is beautiful and bright in our region. The smell of evergreen, the colorful falling leaves, the sound of water over rocks hewn by the hands of time, and the gentle mountain breezes of the place we call home. Long live the Lackawanna Trail. May she ever reign and roll with our beloved Pennsylvania hills. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Julie. That was excellent. It's just different to think that it wasn't really all that long ago when they were that excited about a road. It seems fairly commonplace and mundane to have this just the simple construction of a new road to be that huge of an event. to have thousands of cars in a parade to go to Binghamton. It's fascinating that,
Well,
historically
when
wasn't
we
that
saw
long ago.
how big, like when I was just researching this for myself because I was interested. But when I saw that it was such a huge deal,
Mhm.
and thousands and thousands of people were involved, and it was like a 2 or 3 day event, really, when you look at everything.
Mhm.
We couldn't let it go by without acknowledging it. And so I'm really thankful you reached out to me that I was able to do this. And then we were able to have a small kind of a car show earlier
Mhm.
this year, this summer. But
Good.
yeah.
Yeah, it's neat. If anybody hasn't gone historically on the Lackawanna Trail, now would be an ideal time. There are still, the fall leaves are still hanging on. Now would be an ideal time for a trip. It's a shame that those columns no longer exist. But I suspect, like the Abraham Lincoln statue in Nayog Park, it's one of those mysteries that we may never
We
solve.
may never know.
Christine, did you have a question?
I more of a comment than a question. Thank you, Julie. It was very well done. Um, uh, it just the whole thing, and then even at the end, Sarah, when you commented just now about how excited they were getting for a road, which is so commonplace today, it just immediately reminded me of the new connection that we're trying to get on the railroad from here into New York City, going through the other small towns as well. But and it's something we used to have and maybe didn't appreciate as much. And now we're so I think anyway, people are very excited about this because it's a connection again. So it just reminded me of that and the excitement as well.
Sure. Yeah, it's just that idea of connecting with something else or somewhere else.
Mhm.
Sure.
Mhm.
Any other questions? George, anything to add about competition with the trolley?
Yeah,
George is
no,
our
I was
resident Northern Electric expert. So
just going to, well, I think Chuck Compass knows quite a bit too, but I was just, you mentioned the excitement of a new road, and it was only 25 years or so before. The excitement of going to Clarks Summit and eventually to Factoryville, and they were hoping to go to Binghamton on the Northern Electric. It went through the notch, and they owned the road and had to improve it to get their trolley line through the notch. So that PennDOT would, whatever it was before PennDOT would eventually take that over. But they actually charged people a toll,
Mhm.
not on the trolley, of course, but if you took your wagon or a truck. The Northern Electric took in a lot of milk and produce to the city of Scranton. And so the Lackawanna Trail, in part, and there were other factors, of course, but the Lackawanna Trail, in part, took away that profitable freight traffic.
It did, but it also extended it because, as you said, the trolley didn't make it as far, and so there were still farming communities and others that had goods and produce that could come in, but due to the bad condition of roads or no road at all, they weren't able to have a direct route. So you're right; it took away some from this general area right here. But when you got even beyond Tunkhannock and not Tunkhannock, I'm sorry, Factoryville, and going that way on Route 11, there it stopped and roads were just in deplorable condition. So until this was built, there wasn't that direct connection, even, and then of course with Binghamton to New York.
Yeah.
So for our area, it was huge. It was a big deal.
Well, they tried to go to Binghamton. And in fact, at one point, the Northern Electric owned the trolley company in Binghamton and it was having trouble trying to own it because the legislature in New York didn't like that. They really should have never gone beyond Factoryville. They made money, at least at that point, to Factoryville.
Do you know why they stopped? I never.
Well, I do. I mean, they couldn't get into Montrose. They got to about a mile from Montrose. They were hoping to go in on the Lehigh Valley Railroad, and the railroad said no. So then you had to transfer people to a little stagecoach. And they spent an awful lot of, hundreds of thousands of dollars going through territory that really was not well inhabited. And they never made it into Binghamton. And meanwhile, they came up Market Street. So when you're in Providence Square today, they had the track on Market Street, and they had the responsibility of maintaining that track. And over time, the road became wretched, and the city was very unhappy about that. And one day the trolleys came down and found police and sawhorses at the city line. And of course they sued. And by the time it got through the courts, then the court said, you shouldn't have done that. I mean, how do you run a streetcar and not connect with anything? You know,
Yeah.
because the city line is up at the end of Market Street, probably in that area where the circle used to be, the traffic circle. And the Scranton Railway's down on Main Avenue and Providence Road. So they couldn't do anything. And that's why it ended. And that was very common. You know, you're looking at 1930, 31. It was very common for the interurban industry. Automobiles were basically taking over. And why would you want to, if you had to wait on a trolley, you had to get on a car that might have been vacated by a miner in dirty clothes. If you lived in Greenridge, I'm sure you didn't want to hear people speaking in Ukrainian and Polish and Serbian and Greek. That was very offensive. And that was a big deal back in those days. So why would you want to ride a trolley when you could just get in a car and go where you want to, when you want to?
Yeah.
An independent aspect of personal transportation has always
Yeah.
always won out over public transportation.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Questions from anyone else?
Yeah,
Gail,
I
did
have
you
a
have
question.
something?
Yeah, Julie, what day did you say it opened?
It opened in 1922. I want to say it was June. I
Okay,
think it was June 29th. It was the end of June. We actually had our celebration like a week later, like it was in July that we met.
on October 17th of 22, my grandparents probably used Lackawanna Trail to go up to Binghamton to get married.
Oh, I love knowing that. Oh my goodness. If I had known that ahead of time, I would have gotten a picture and put that on there. So you being here is due in part to the Lackawanna Trail.
It was. There's always a connection to everything.
There's a lot more to that story, but
Yeah, and I have like all these little stories along the trail that like there was terrible accidents. I mentioned it briefly that when they moved the trail, that's why the pillars were originally moved. They moved them because there was lots people lost their lives. There was a dangerous curve on a stretch of what's called Old Lackawanna Trail. And today you can still, there's some of it that's still in the woods and like grown over. You can see it still. So where the road is now, as you leave Clarks Summit and head toward Dalton, you know, that road is a newer stretch. There's a portion of it that's newer. And we know the pillars were moved there successfully because we have pictures of it and it became like a 2-lane highway, you know, but somewhere along the way, when we believe based on the pictures we have and the evidence we have, it was probably when the highway was open to be a 4 or 5 lane road with a passing lane. When they did that, they went missing. So I don't know. There's nothing, I can find no evidence of where they went. I've called PennDOT. I've called everybody that would have been responsible for that. And they're all like, I don't know. But yeah, that's neat, Gail. Thanks for sharing that about your grandparents. I love that.
I mean, the easiest thing is to just get rid of it. But
Yeah, but they were
in front of
so,
somebody's mansion. You never
yeah.
know.
And I think I don't have it in my notes here, but I believe what we found out was that stretch of highway was open from a 2-lane to a 4-lane on that stretch in the 40s, which would have been during the war, World War II. And so did they chop it up and sell limestone blocks or whatever to make money for the war effort? Was it one of those type of things? But the fact that the Scranton Times didn't cover that, like I didn't find anything in the newspaper about it. So that seems like that if they did that, that would have been a just cause and a good cause. I doubt, because they were so prized by the people that did the road, I would be really surprised if they junked them, but maybe they did. It's possible. But the date of that road opening to be a 4-lane would have been in the 40s, you know, so.
That would make sense. That would be the logical time to knock
Yeah,
them
and
down
they did
or,
that
you
with a
know.
lot of things. It was like things that you sacrificed for the war effort. There was a lot of, I'm very proud to be part of Lackawanna County and the communities that are here, because when you read the history during the war, and that, you know, it's called the America's Greatest Generation for a reason. The amount of volunteerism and sacrifice of the people that were even at home, lots of people donating to the American Red Cross, lots of people signing up, volunteering to go overseas, a lot of help happening, you know, just in the community. People were rationing willingly and doing what they had to do for the war effort.
Mhm.
So that makes the most sense to me too, Sarah. That's
Yeah,
probably,
I mean, maybe because there was so much going on, it wasn't newsworthy in and of itself. It was just
Yeah.
another part of the war effort that it
I
wasn't
agree.
necessarily covered as an event itself. So that would make sense, sure.
And like I said, the original plan was there was going to be this big arch, and that never was completed. They
Mhm.
kind of spent all their money already. They couldn't go back and ask for more for that. So
Sure.
it never did end up being what it was supposed to be.
Okay,
So yeah.
very good. All right, anything else to add? Any other questions? All right, thank you very much, Julie, for joining us and for that information. It's wild to think about that a road was really that big of a historic accomplishment at the time, not really all that long ago. So thank you again for joining us. Our next program will be November 11th. Will be a week early due to the Thanksgiving holiday. We'll be joined by our friend Rich Jenkins, who is now the 2022 Lackawanna Historical Society's Volunteer of the Year. Rich is a descendant of Colonel John Jenkins, who was involved in the American Revolution. Rich will be speaking a little bit about his ancestors' history and his story, and also outlining a new collection that we have at the Historical Society that are Colonel Jenkins papers. It's a colonial era archive that we don't dip into all that often. So Rich has taken on the job of indexing and cataloging that. So he'll be talking about some of those resources that are available at the Historical Society in that collection. So join us again for the next episode of Lackawanna Pastimes. Thank you again to Julie and to everyone who joined us. Have a lovely weekend, everyone.